So what I want to talk about tonight is the idea of living in Babylon, saints in a foreign land is what I titled the message. What we're going to talk about tonight is how do we, some of us in the call living in the United States of America, one in the call living in Spain, how do we live in a country that has such unrighteous behaviors in it, and how it's not condoned and not outlawed, stuff like that, and how as a Bible-believing person we are to live in this country and the behavior which we're supposed to have concerning this. So the first thing I want to discuss is a lot of people believe that their home country, particularly Western Americans like to believe that America is the biblical city, the biblical country of the world. They usually take all of the standard protocol that's laid out in the Bible for government legislation and stuff like that, and what they're supposed to, how the rules and the laws are supposed to apply, and they say, well, that's how America should be. That's not the case, though, because the Bible speaks of biblical Israel, not the United States of America. Because of that, we start confusing these things, and we start thinking that, well, our country is supposed to be ran this way, and our country needs to be this way, and if it's not, then God's going to judge it, kind of thing. But we want to point out that the democracy of the United States of America, it's less than 300 years old, is not the theocracy of biblical Israel laid out in the Scriptures. The difference in a democracy and a theocracy is that democracy is ran by the people for the people and equal votes. Okay, with a president, we have a lead person that leads our country, and then there's sub positions below that. A theocracy comes from two words, theos and ocracy, which is God and like government of. So it's like a government of God. It's a government ordained and ran by a God. There's been many theocracies in ancient Near Eastern countries and history, but biblical Israel is a theocracy. It's how it was laid out and how it's supposed to be. It is that the highest position is the chief God, whether that be a monotheistic theocracy or polytheistic or henotheistic, whatever. A chief God is the top guy, and then below that you might have the supreme leader, the king, something like that. It's kind of like a monarchy from there down. But the theocracy is different than the democracy for obvious reasons. Our highest official is President Barack Obama, who lives in our White House in Washington, D.C. Theocracies have kings in capital cities, but they also have one step above that where we don't in a democracy. Now, America was founded by theists. The specifics aren't across the board. There were some deists, there were some Catholics, there were some Protestants, stuff like that. It was all kinds of, it was a diversity, but it was deist. Okay, a theist, I'm sorry. They did have, for the most part, the founding fathers of America were believers in God, a God, Yahweh of the Bible, most times. And so many people will say, well, that's how our nation was founded, so that's how our nation needs to be now. Well, the thing about it, roots change. Like, foundations aren't the end result most times. Look at Rome. Rome was established by Romulus and Remus, super pagan, but eventually the founding of Rome, I believe, was around 900 BC, but in 325 AD, approximately 1,200 years later, if I get the dates right there, I know 325 is right, but they adopted Christianity. So they went from pagan roots, from Greek, pantheon foundation, to a Christian ending, and that's what they are now. The Catholic Church ran out of Rome, Italy, and it's a Catholic nation, a Catholic land, and Catholic government. Okay, so foundations do change. But in reality, America is not governed by the Bible, let alone the God of the Bible. So when we live in this country as a Bible believer, we're living in a foreign land, because we're not living in the country, we're in the nation that was laid out and established and spoken so much of in the Bible of Israel, biblical Israel. So God is not our center of our government, and the Bible is not the authority. But we can relate to this, because there is a man in Scripture who lived a pretty similar lifestyle. His name was Daniel. And our first scripture we're going to be reading from is Daniel chapter 1, so if everyone wants to go ahead and turn there, that's where we're going to be. But Daniel was a believer in Yahweh. He was a biblical Israelite. He lived in the kingdom of Judah. He was a righteous man, continued living righteously after he gets deported into Babylon. Brief history here. You had King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. After that came David, after Saul was dethroned. King David comes up. He has the unified kingdom of Israel. All 12 tribes had their own portion of land. They had their own city-states, pretty much in the Near East, what was called Israel. But eventually, after King David, you got Solomon. Well, Solomon's sons, after him, they didn't do really well. They were, Jeroboam was a really bad king. And because of the family tension and arguments, the kingdom of Israel split into two. You had a southern kingdom, and you had a northern kingdom. The southern kingdom consisted of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, primarily. The northern kingdom consisted of the other 10 tribes. So naturally, the northern kingdom was still called the kingdom of Israel because it was more tribes. It was the majority of tribes up there. Now, in the southern kingdom, Judah was the bigger of the two between Judah and Benjamin, so they called the southern kingdom the kingdom of Judah. Okay, they just renamed it after their tribal affiliation. Well, now you've got this civil war that's happened, and now you've got the two splitting of this kingdom, and you've got different monarchies. Okay, you've got a northern kingdom with its capital in Samaria, the southern kingdom with its capital in Jerusalem, hosted by two different kings. In the year 722 BC, Assyria comes in, and they siege the northern kingdom, take the people, the northern Israelites, and take them into captivity and disperse them across the world. Around 200 and something years later, in 586 BC, almost 200 years later, in 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar comes in from Babylon and takes the southern kingdom and deports everybody off to Babylon. That's where we get the Babylonian captivity. Not a lot of people know about the Assyrian captivity, but that is the case. So in 586 was the final deportation of the southern kingdom of Judah into Babylon. Daniel was one of those in Judah who went to Babylon. So he goes from his biblical city, the nation which was a theocracy and governed by most of the time a bad king, but would have a couple good kings. He was in a theocracy which gets taken off into a monarchy into Babylon. So that's Daniel's backstory. Now this nation which he goes into is extremely pagan. It's Babylon. I mean, we hear a lot about Babylon. But I want you to note Daniel's behavior once he goes into this country which doesn't govern itself by the rules of his home country. Okay? So we're going to be in Daniel chapter 1. We're going to read verses 1 through 9 right now. I'll be reading from the ESV. Yes, Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God, King Nebuchadnezzar's God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, some of these names in the Bible are kind of funny, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's place, or palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. That's what the Chaldeans were, the Babylonians.
Yes.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. Then they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of the time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. 2 more verses. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Okay, so what we have here is we have Daniel and 3 youths get deported into Babylon, and they're chosen to learn the literature and to become a Babylonian. Okay, they were to learn the language of the Babylonians was Aramaic. They were to learn that. Daniel's book here is actually written about 3/4 in Aramaic rather than Hebrew, as the rest of the Old Testament predominantly. But Daniel, when he was in Babylon, understood that he was in a foreign land. He understood that the land he's in is not the land that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, had ordained. This was an exile. He was an exile. This was the promised exile that Yahweh said was going to come on Israel if they disobeyed. But note his behavior. Okay, what did he do when they said, we're going to give you the food of the king, the food and the wine of the king? Daniel said, no, I don't want to defile myself with that. I need to just, eventually we see that he just wants vegetables and water. So note what he does here. He doesn't accept the defilement of the new nation he lives in. So we're going to read 7 more verses real fast. We're going to see that play out. We're going to start back in verse 10. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned you food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So would you endanger my head with the king? Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all of the youths who ate the king's food. So the stewards took away their food and wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So, what was the reason Daniel didn't accept the food in Babylon? I think there's 10 different main theories that I've read in commentaries that people have wrote on. I'm going to list off 2 that are pretty that I believe are the 2 top ones. One, this is coming from the Word Biblical Commentary on Daniel. The author escapes me right now. I'm sorry. He said, and I quote, "Pagan food and drink may simply epitomize the pagan uncleanliness associated with exile. This reflects the fact that what we eat and what we drink, like what we wear and how we speak, generally constitutes an outward expression of our self-identity and commitments. These are particularly significant for groups in exile or under persecution. Daniel's abstinence thus symbolizes his avoiding assimilation." So that theory says that the reason Daniel didn't eat the food in Babylon is because it would have made him a Babylonian. He would have been finally seen as a Babylonian and seen as in giving up to his exile, and thus become a part of the exile, become assimilated into the nation of Babylon. So he would stay away from it. Theory number 2, which is the one I like theory number 1 there a lot, but theory number 2 probably has a little bit to it too. It's quite possible that both the meat and the wine were ritually unclean. Obviously, Babylon was not a kosher establishment, so unclean meats were practically guaranteed to have been on the table. But even further, the wineskins could have been made from animals which were unclean that held the wine. His decision to disobey the Torah commandments would have expressed his God-forsaking, defiled heart. So Daniel would have defiled himself if he'd have said, okay, let's say this, at the table, the meat was just a bunch of pork or camel or something like that. Daniel would have just give up and said, okay, I'll eat it because I'm in Babylon and I'm in captivity. That would have been him forsaking God's commandments which say don't eat that. Don't defile yourself with this unclean meat. So that could be the reason why Daniel didn't do it. That's typically the way I lean on it, because Babylon was, they didn't have kosher dietary laws, and I can guarantee that was on the table. And wineskins are made from animal skins, so the wine would have been unclean too if it had been in contact with something like a pig leather or something like that. So, but like Babylon, America is inhabited with pagans, murderers, thieves, homosexuals, and the like. Okay, it's not just a food issue. We have that in America, but America's also got some other problems, as Babylon did too. I can guarantee they had thieves, murderers, homosexuals, pagans, and the like. But so does America. Now here's a statistic. Since 1973, since the legalization of clinical abortion in America, United States of America, this would be the ones who are clinically done, not ones under the table, approximately 53 million babies have been aborted since 1973. It's a lot of babies. That'd fill the Superdomes that we have in America full, every one of them, in one shot. But thankfully, the rate has went down in the last couple of years. We had 1.06 million aborted in 2011. We had 984,000 aborted in 2013. Got below a million a year in the last couple of years. But regardless, that's a lot of murder. And as most know, I'm pro-life. I consider that murder. I consider that unrighteous behavior. But that's legal in the United States of America, in certain places. Speaking on homosexuality, according to a recent survey, approximately 3.8% of Americans identify themselves as a homosexual. I would say the number is probably closer to 10 or 15%, because I'm sure a lot of them just don't want to publicly say it in a survey they get asked if you're homosexual. So that's unrighteous behavior too. So, and both of these are seen as abomination to the eyes of Yahweh. Laying with a man as you would lay with a woman, per Leviticus, is an abomination. According to Proverbs, you take the life of an innocent person, you put to death an innocent person, that's an abomination. So both of these behaviors are very, very much wrong in Yahweh's eyes, but they're acceptable in America because of the country we live in. The legislature that we are under says these are acceptable behaviors, and coming this summer, we're going to have the decision made by the Congress whether or not homosexual marriage will be instituted. So just keep that in mind. We got some behavior in America that it doesn't line up with what the biblical protocol says. But staying on the idea of homosexuality, LGBT, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and tranny. LGBT rights are just around the corner, and to think that America will never ordain or adopt the practice is foolishness or ignorance. It's going to happen one day. If it doesn't happen soon, it's going to happen sooner than later. So, in America, how are we to deal with this? Like, how are we to deal with this behavior around us and live among the ungodly? I've got a teaching going to come out soon. It's going to be on the idea of, is homosexuality a choice, or is it the product of decisions, or is it natural, stuff like that. So staying on that, I want to also note that in America we have freedom. That's what this country is established on, and it's what our founding fathers fought for. And this is a democracy. We have freedom, as I was pointing out earlier in the video. So the way we behave around this, we have to consider this. When we see all these unrighteous things going on, my American rights, as the right of an American citizen, allow me to practice the religion of my choice. But if I use my American rights of freedom of religion to cause an infringement on the rights of gay Americans, I become a hypocrite. In other words, I can't say with my freedom, you can't be free to do what you want. Otherwise, I become a hypocrite. Though that behavior, I'm not an advocate for homosexuality or anything. Don't get me wrong. But we have to watch out and try not to be hypocritical, because who are we to take away freedom from another American? Okay? I'm using freedom to take away theirs, practically. So, when we live among the ungodly, we need to ask a couple questions. Is it our place in America, United States of America, is it our place to change the behavior of the nation which we live in? Question number 2. Is it our place to insist that America completely adopt biblical principles? Number 3. Is it our place to change America into the biblical Israel? Now look at Daniel again. Daniel was in the most pagan of pagan lands at the time, Babylon. Vicious military state that was doing some crazy bad stuff. But what did Daniel do when he was there? Did Daniel, at the feast where he said you're going to be eating the meat and the wine that the king eats and drinks, did Daniel stand up at dinner and say, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, you need to stop all this, we need to stop dinner, get all this pork off here, take all that lobster out of here, get new wineskins for all this wine, let's get this place kosher up. And no, Daniel didn't do that. Daniel accepted where he lived was a foreign land. He was a saint, an Israeli saint in a foreign land. But Daniel didn't compromise his own behaviors. He understood the behaviors in the legislature of the nation which he was in would not be changed, and it would forever be pagan, or at least in his time. And that wasn't his choice to change. But it was his responsibility to maintain righteous behavior and actions while he was in this pagan land. Same way with us in America or Spain or wherever we might be from. when we've got unrighteousness around us, we aren't to make it a point to try to change the legislature in the government of the place we're in. That's gonna cause more problems than it's gonna do anything. There's a big church up in Westboro Baptist Church. A lot of people are familiar with that place. It's Westboro is a little out there, but they're trying to change as much as they possibly can. They're trying to take away rights of Americans, telling people they're going to hell, that God hates them, stuff like this. They're trying to reach out to the president and the government, and they're trying to change. But what is that doing? What good did that bring? As far as I'm concerned, it brought nothing good. All it did was bring hatred, more hatred on the secular world onto the Christian church, onto the Bible-believing people by the non-Bible believers. Now they're seen as religious extremists because they want to change everything. Okay, I'm not saying we shouldn't help people, and that's what I'm going to get to in a minute, but we shouldn't just go attack the country which we live in, because this government, according to the words of Paul, that Yahweh establishes leaders and authorities. So why don't we take Daniel's behavior and mimic that and remain the same for us, but not necessarily go after the place we're living in and try to change it. But like I said, we can help people to change. Okay? Though Babylon will always remain the same, or America will always remain the same, or Spain will always remain the same, Rome will be the same, Africa will be the same, anything like that. So I want to read a couple more scriptures real fast. We're going to be in the book of Revelation now. I'm going to go to chapter 18. You can go ahead and turn there. But Babylon is going to fall one day. But Israel will stand. Biblical Israel, and those who have joined themselves to Israel and put their faith in Yahweh through the blood of His Son, sacrifice His Son, will remain. Though it might not be a walk in the park right now, that's going to be how it ends one day. Okay, so we're going to be in Revelation 18. I'm going to read verses 1 through 5. We're going to skip a few, and we're going to go to like verse 21. But just listen to these words. Revelation 18, verse 1. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of her passion, of her sexual immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Verse 4, Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you partake in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. I'm going to skip to verse 21 now. Verse 21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And a craftsman of any craft will be found in you no more. And the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of a bridegroom and a bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her found the blood of prophets and saints, and all who had been slain on the earth. So as you can see, Babylon's going to fall one day. The unrighteous behavior and all those who partake in the unrighteous behavior of the system of Babylon, the nation of Babylon. I'm not saying that's America, the United States of America. I believe that's a sinful system. Everything's going to fall. But the next chapter of Revelation gives us the good part. That's something about the Bible. It always gives us really bad and then really good, or really good and then really bad. So let's read the good part now. It's going to be in Revelation 21. We're going to read verses 1 through 9. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of the heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And he will wipe away every tear from their eye, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And he who was sitting on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So what can we do? That we know, when we know that we live in a land that's not necessarily the biblical land laid out, the utopian land laid out in the Bible, specifically the first 5 books, more so in Deuteronomy. How are we to behave when we live here and so much unrighteousness is around us and it seems like it's just getting worse? It is. It's especially here in the United States of America, the unrighteous behavior is getting worse. It's becoming legalized even more and more each day, it seems like. But how are we, the righteous people, the biblical people, supposed to live around this? We know we can't change the legislature. We can't change the government. Or if we try, it's going to be to no avail. But we can do something. We can share the love of Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the one true God of the world, with others while both not forcing someone to change his or her lifestyle, but while also not compromising our own righteous behavior. We can go and we can share with people. We can show them love. As a minister, I try to go and share with people as much as I can and help them make their lives better. But sometimes people don't want to accept it. But sometimes people just don't want to be a part of this. But does that mean I'm supposed to love them any less? No, it means I'm supposed to try again. Never give up. I want to help these people because everybody can always turn around. So I can go to the people and I can talk to the people and I can try to be the light of the world as we're told to be in the book of Matthew, and shine to the rest of the people so that people give the Father glory. Okay, that's not talking about just the righteous people. That's talking about the unrighteous people. We're supposed to go out there and we're supposed to shine so bright that even the unrighteous people want to become light like us. So we can't change the place, but we can change the people. But we're told to make disciples. That's the bottom line. We're told to make disciples, not change every wicked nation's government or legislature. So when we live around this stuff, just keep that in mind. Keep in mind that this is biblical. This was told it was going to happen. Babylon is going to be unrighteous, but the righteous are going to be spread throughout the world in the unrighteous places. We're to go out there and we're to infiltrate within the system, like within the people. We're to change people's lives, help people change lives, and to make disciples out of them. We're not supposed to be geared towards going to the government and changing, well, you don't need to be doing this, you don't need to be legalizing this. It's going to happen regardless if we try to or not. That's the reality of it. Okay, we can be advocates for biblical principles within our country, but we can't just forcefully go out and try to change all this. We need to be more concerned with the people within the country than the people running the country or what runs the country. So maybe we can change our behavior a little bit. Maybe we can get back on track exactly what we're supposed to be doing and focus more on the big picture rather than the government and stuff that we're not really going to be able to change. So hope you take this and hope you learn a little bit, and maybe we can change the world one person at a time.